you'll get the little indication that this is now being streamed live on YouTube, and which I don't ever expect anyone to be watching it, but I do like to be able to have it for people to look at afterwards. All right, great. So let's get started. So I am very, very, very pleased to introduce Glenn Northern, whom you've already met and talked about blankets with. So all the poor people who are going to be watching this on YouTube will have no idea what that's about. But that's
Best that he'll have our blanket endorsement.
Exactly.
That's right. But let's just say we're cozy already.
we are cozy. We are cozy in the extreme.
Love it.
All right.
With that, I'm going to share my screen. And we will put this into slide mode. Work with me here.
Yeah, I think I want to say down at the bottom, but this is different than mine.
New share. And now, there we go. Are you seeing?
Wait a second, Glenn. Will you just tell us a little bit about yourself and how it is
Yes,
that you are
actually.
in this role?
So actually, I am Glenn Northern. I co-lead our 73 Forward program at the National Council of Jewish Women. 73 Forward is a new initiative of NCJW's that really aims to create a collective framework for Jewish action around abortion access. We really want to educate and mobilize the Jewish community around abortion justice and abortion access. All right.
And I can say one thing about Glenn, which is that he went to Williams College. So
That's right.
and I went to Amherst College. So we are on
Mortal enemies.
We are mortal. Exactly. Once a year, we have to dislike each other. The rest of the time, we can be buddies. But
that's right. It's very, very funny. So that's a little bit about NCJW and myself. I've been doing work in the reproductive health rights and justice community for, pretty much since I graduated and moved down to DC in 1991. The last 10 years, it's really been within the faith work around this. So I worked at the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice for a while. I worked at Planned Parenthood. In the second iteration at Planned Parenthood, I really was doing clergy organizing and African-American organizing. And then I was at Catholics for Choice for a while, and now I'm at the National Council of Jewish Women. So this is, I'm going to be our guide along this journey. And really, I'm going to lay out for you the parts of our conversation today. I don't really want this to be me talking at everybody this whole time, but the first part will be a little bit didactic as I set the stage around the landscape, around Repro Shabbat, around Rabbis for Repro, and our 73 Forward program. Then we will take a look at a story or two, discuss that story, and then we'll wrap things up. Along with some chances for some action. So we are small enough that we don't have to drop these in the chat. We can just actually sort of say your name, where you're from, why you're here, sort of what you're hoping to get out of this, why you're here. And then let's talk a little bit about some values that you hold dear.
And so I'll start. I'm Jim. I am from Brighton, Massachusetts, near Boston. And I am here both in my sort of capacity as the rabbi for this congregation and to convene this group, and also because this is just a very important issue for me personally. It always has been. I think I told Glenn that the one time that I joined a march on Washington was the March for Women's Lives back in 1992, and so the values that are, I think, most relevant here have to do with the dignity of every human being and right to bodily autonomy. Jim, you're up.
Well, I'm also Jim, and I live here in Cambridge, and I just consider myself a politically liberal person, and I have been living in a state where abortion has been legal and people have access to abortion. And I believe, I'm a psychologist by profession, and I believe that people have developmental issues during the course of their lives, and they should be in a position to make decisions about their lives. And I don't like the idea of other people deciding that they can't, and it disturbs me. So basically, that's maybe that expresses some values that I have, and I'm here tonight because I really am dreading an upcoming decision by the Supreme Court, and I don't know if the horse has already left the barn, but the whole issue of abortion is going to continue to be on the front burner for a long, long time to come. And I'm also interested in, because I recently heard a podcast that talked about this, the difference between abortion access as the main issue as opposed to reproductive justice as the main issue. Are these two terms that mean the same thing? Or do they have actually nuances that matter in the terms of their difference? Okay, that's it.
No, that's terrific. Thank you. If you see me looking down, that's me. I'm taking notes, sort of old-fashioned way, like with a pen and paper.
What's that?
Sure.
So I'm Sherry, and I'm not Jim. And I'm from Cambridge, and I'm here because I think that issues of abortion are very complicated, and I want to learn more. And I'm disturbed that Roe versus Wade is in danger of being overturned, and I'd like to hear more about what can be done in that regard. And I guess some two values I hold are justice and compassion. Desire for justice.
Yeah, and so Glenn, and so I'm in DC, and I'm here because I'm really excited. I love talking about these kinds of things. I mean, it's kind of funny. In this work that I've been doing for many, many years, I talk about the things that folks really say you never should talk with other folks about, like in polite company, sort of sex and politics and religion. Like that's what I talk about all the time. Literally what I talk about all the time. And but I also think that there's a power in talking about it that helps destigmatize these issues. I think it's an open air, open light kind of situation that the more we talk about these things, the less fraught they become, frankly. And the value that I would hold dear, it's funny, I think there's a lot of overlap, because the value that drives me in this work and is my North Star in general is compassion. Like, that is the piece that I try to live my life by. So that aligns, I've heard dignity, I've heard autonomy, I've heard justice, I heard compassion. Very, very interesting words. Let's hold those, and we will come back to them a little bit later. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the stuff that's going on in the nation. So 2 states that you've probably heard a little bit about are Mississippi and Texas. Well, first of all, I'm actually going to back up a little bit. Last year, 2021, was the worst year for abortion access since Roe. There were over 100 different laws passed, actually introduced in the states in the last year. And it was sort of the worst year that we've had since 1973. 2 of those are really, one is the Texas bill, which is an incredibly cruel but very, very clever piece of legislation. It's bans abortion at 6 weeks, and when they count, they actually count from your last menstrual period. So 4 weeks is often the first time that you'll even recognize that you've missed a pregnancy. So 6 weeks is really, really before most folks even know that they're pregnant. But the other piece in the Texas legislation that's so awful is the fact that it deputizes individuals to turn in their neighbor if they think their neighbor is getting an abortion, which has the effect of isolating the person at the very moment when they're seeking help from clergy, when they're seeking help from their sister or brother or partners, or anybody else in their life that might be there to actually help them. And the law then affords the person that turns them in, if it goes to court and they actually win, the person who sued them gets $10,000. The person who turned them in gets $10,000. So it basically creates a vigilante bounty hunters for individuals, bounty hunters turning in neighbors around abortion.
I thought it was the people who help them to get an abortion who end up getting sued.
That's right.
They do, right? They do, and then the person who turned them in gets the money.
But not the person who is seeking an abortion, but
Correct.
rather the person who helps them get an abortion.
Right. So like a rabbi who helped someone seek an abortion in Texas could be sued.
Yes, sure.
Then we also have the Mississippi case. So this is the case that's actually before the Supreme Court. This is the one that they heard oral arguments for on December 1st. It involves a 15-week ban. There is only one clinic left in Mississippi. And if the justice's lines of questioning in the case are to be, an indication of what's to come in June, we ought to be very, very worried, which we are. Justice Barrett seemed to pursue a line of questioning around safe havens. So safe havens were a set of laws that were created in the, I think, 90s, which allowed women to sort of drop off their babies, newborns, without being prosecuted. It's sort of a safe way of handing over your baby if you didn't actually want to have it. But of course, it still requires you to be pregnant for 9 months before and it completely ignores the fact that for instance, for African-American women, the act of carrying a pregnancy to term is extraordinarily dangerous. Like, not extraordinarily dangerous. The maternal mortality rate among African-American women is very, very high. And so there's a huge disconnect between Amy Coney Barrett's idea that safe havens are a solution in this situation and the reality that exists for many people. And, Justice Kavanaugh's line of questioning wasn't any better, and neither was even Justice Roberts, who seemed to suggest that 15 weeks would actually be fine, rather than the 24 weeks that, rather than this trimester framework that we exist currently under Roe.
So Glenn, I'm just going to interrupt you for one moment to welcome Marcia, who's joined us on the telephone. And
hi.
Hi, Marcia. How are you?
Sorry I was late.
That's okay. We're so glad you're here.
Thank you. Thank you
Welcome,
for your
Marcia.
welcome.
Hi, Marcia.
Hi. Hello.
Yeah.
So
Sherry
we
and
are
I
just
here.
talking about some of the recent cases, as I sort of lay the landscape around the nation and how not great things are around abortion access, and likely to get worse in the immediate future. Which brings us to the next slide. This is a map of the United States should Roe fall. The orange are really the desert states. So these are the, whoops, I did not, how do I go back? The orange are the desert states. These are the states that will have bans that will go into effect if come June, which is when we expect the decision, the Supreme Court sides with Mississippi. The green states are states that have nearby clinics. So they're border states. As you see, Massachusetts is blue because it's not, there's no likelihood that, that Massachusetts is going to do a ban, but it's actually not particularly close to any of the orange states. New York and Pennsylvania come between there. But what Massachusetts and other blue states and green states can expect is that if Roe falls in June, there will be an uptake in the number of individuals who will be traveling out of state to states that are safe and secure. So I would expect that Massachusetts would be getting folks all the way from Michigan and Ohio, because even just in Pennsylvania and New York, they will be overwhelmed. All right, so next slide. So the first set of questions I was really asking about values that you hold dear generally. It wasn't necessarily thinking about the values that you would hold relative to abortion. So I would love to popcorn out again values that you actually think about or associate when you think about abortion or abortion providers. And Marcia, I would love to have you sort of say a value that you hold dear irrespective of abortion, and then also say some values that you think about when you think about abortion.
I'm pro-life. I'm sorry. That's an interesting slip. I'm pro-choice. I'm definitely pro-choice. And yet I do agree that life begins at conception, but it's not the life that we all know today. It's a different life, but it is life. So I guess that's where my ambivalence comes in, because I do think that life begins at conception, and yet I am pro-choice because I feel that there are so many complicated variables that cause a person to need or want an abortion, that it's really not up to me to decide what she should do. So that's about all I have to say now, at least.
Thank you. I actually love to talk a little bit more about that. Well, first of all, when you said sort of pro-life, that was sort of call it a Freudian slip. That is a fascinating, and we'll have some slides later that really talk about how the language around abortion, this movement has really shifted over the years. Initially it was pro-choice versus pro-life. That is not necessarily how we're talking about it at this moment in time. And part of that evolution really is because neither of those pieces really captures either side particularly well. The folks who support abortion access, it's not like we're against life. Like, that is certainly not the case. I think it's much like what you said. I think you said it's complicated, and there are very many variables that would make an individual, want or need an actual abortion. So what do you think? So other folks, Cherry, Jim, both Jims, how much overlap is there between the values that you articulated at the beginning and any of the values that you would name here? Like the most personal of your values, and then the values that come up for you when you actually talk about abortion.
Yeah. I mean, I was actually thinking about abortion when I named those two, but I love yours as well, Glenn. And you know what, I was actually, when you showed the picture I'm assuming those people were in Mississippi. I don't know if but the Dobbs case, and I remember I read a profile of the woman who runs that clinic in Jackson, and she just struck me as such a courageous and compassionate person. And those are two. I think there's somehow these days it takes a great deal of courage to, especially in places where the culture is so opposed to women's rights, to go ahead and have an abortion. I actually do. I also think, Marsha, I make that kind of mistake all the time, because I actually do feel that that I am pro-life. Pretty significantly, I'm pro-life. That we say l'chaim, right? We say, it's and also, like, I don't feel like abortion is a great outcome. It might be the right outcome, But I would prefer for, for babies to be wanted and to be born. And for, for people who don't want to get pregnant, or people who don't want to be pregnant, that they not get pregnant in the first place. That would be preferable to me. So yeah, and also just that, my biggest fear with the impending changes to abortion access is that there will be a glut of people dying because of botched abortions. And
that's another.
yeah. So I somehow feel like the anti-choice is kind of pro-death in a way.
Yes.
I recognize that a fetus developing in the womb is alive. It's a living. It's different than a stone or a roll of Scotch tape or something like that. It's a living, developing organism. But I don't associate to it the same status that I associate to something that is someone who has already been born. I believe, for example, that it should be possible to use stem cells from fertilized or from developing fetuses for medical purposes. So I understand that there is it is painful and difficult to terminate a pregnancy. I think people should be able to have that decision. And I really hate the fact that there is like a battle going on with like entrenched forces, and there's like barbed wire, and people, and even murder gets committed around this issue, that it becomes so fraught with people saying what other people need to do, and people try.
Yes, the pro-life movement is willing to murder,
to use the government's power to
commit murder just because they want to affirm their pro-life position.
Yes, that's what I'm talking about. So that's what I think. I mean, I do think that people should be able to choose, and I think that I have a great deal of respect for the people who are providing abortion access for people, but I don't want to see them as having to be martyrs, or people who are like having to take their life into their hands every day that they're doing what they're doing.
Carrie, what values come to mind for you when you think of abortion, or the folks that are abortion providers?
I agree with Rabbi Jim. I see them as having integrity and courage and strength in these times because of the cloud that's over it right now. I think that since we're talking about our feelings about abortion altogether, I think it's very complicated. I see it as a lesser of evils. I don't think that it's something that should be or is committed lightly. But it's a lot better than women having to go to secret places and endanger their health and feel like they're doing something so awful and having their whole lives ruined. I don't think that's right either.
Right. There is an enormous amount of stigma that exists in the culture around reproductive health and rights, around abortion, around a variety of these issues. It is actually one piece that's different than 1973 and pre-1973 is because of medication abortion, things are likely to be significantly safer than they were before that. Medication abortion is very safe and very effective up to 9 or 10 weeks. Of course, there are states that will ban it. In fact, Texas is one of those states that both has a 6-week ban and actually has a ban against medication abortion. But it is a piece of hope in this terrain. All right, so the words that I hear folks using were courageous, compassionate, respect, integrity, strength, combined with words that we used earlier, dignity, autonomy, justice, compassion. What I want to do now is, I think the next slide is really gets at, if there is a lot of tension, there is a lot of struggle within the culture around this issue. But one of the ways that we can keep the argument less polarized, I think, is really when we stick to that's the reason why I keep going back to these values pieces. And so one of the ways that the language around abortion access has really changed and evolved is to incorporate a lot more of the values around this, because for a long time we really lost sight of the moral high ground that exists around giving individuals choice, the giving individuals the right to make the decision based on what's right for them. So the next slide, this is based on research that the National Women's Law Center did, which is a secular partner. And I'm not going to read these slides, but what's really, really fascinating, and the gist of all of the research that they did, was that the most powerful and effective messages that our side could use really boiled down to values-based messaging, which is fascinating because folks in the faith-based community and religious community have been using values messaging to talk about these issues for a really long time. So it's actually the secular community catching up to the faith-based community around this. But you'll see, like, a number of the things that you mentioned earlier: autonomy and agency, freedom. The next slide, I'm going to jump down. Justice, compassion, and dignity. These are all the values that they surfaced as being really strong message points. And I'll keep this up for a minute so that you can look at it. A couple of others that they named, economic security, the idea that sometimes a person knows that it's right not to have a child because they can't actually afford the ones that they have. And so bringing another child in is not the responsible thing for them to do for their family. Pop back up to the other one. Safe and healthy. Freedom. Actually, I'm going to stick on that one for a moment because this one is quite fascinating. Judaism both permits abortion and sometimes even requires it when the life of the pregnant person, the mother, is in jeopardy. So the notion that the state can step in and tell something that goes against what their religion actually would ask of them is extraordinarily problematic. Because actually, when you go back to the Texas law, for instance, that doesn't actually have exceptions for rape or incest, or it doesn't have those exceptions. And so if someone deemed that those, it is absolutely a religious liberty, religious freedom violation. It's encoding somebody else's religion's law to Texas SB 8 encodes somebody else's religion's law into law. Now, I sort of say that, but what do people think about that? Does people agree? Do people push back on me?
No, I agree with you, and I think that I agree with you both in terms of needing to use these values, this sort of values talk, as not as a justification, but as as how we talk about these issues. And also, yeah, I think that the words religious freedom today have been, like so many concepts have been co-opted, right, to protect a kind of a faux majoritarian kind of expression of there's plenty of Christians, believing, practicing Christians who don't come down on the no abortion at any time position. So to pretend that they all do is denying them their freedom of religion.
Exactly.
I'm actually very disturbed that one religious view about a health issue should become the government's dictate as to how everybody should act. It really is very disturbing to me. And I remember that when I was a child growing up, my parents were very upset and involved, and my father had spent a lot of time advocating around the needs of Jewish people being recognized in the communities in which we lived. It didn't occur to me until now that here I am, 60 years later, and this issue is coming up again. I didn't think that was going to happen. It kind of blindsided me.
Right.
But not to take the other side. That's not what I'm doing. But I don't see here the sense that, I was saying to Jim that the whole issue to me reminds me of the story of the Baal Shem Tov who slaughtered an animal, but did so with tears in his eyes.
On his knife.
On his knife, I'm sorry. There were tears on his knife. And I don't get the sense in this argument that, we are putting the end to life of what could be a baby and a person. It's just that the circumstances around it call for that in those particular instances. But when you look at this value statement and text and so forth, and when it's discussed, there isn't that sense. It's the right to choose is what has been called, but there's more to it. And I think that's unfortunate because it doesn't really enter into, yes, we are killing life, but we're doing it in the context of in instances where unfortunately that's what the best choice is.
Yeah. So actually, you know what? I'm gonna jump us. I really want to get to an actual story, because I think that what you raised about the nuances and the complexities of all of this really do, because some people make the choice and while, and it feels like some people it's a very difficult choice. Other people it's less of a difficult choice, but they know that they made the right decision. The idea that there's actually a lot of regret around abortion, that's actually not true. Generally, folks, but regret and the nuance of grief, the nuance of this was the right decision. Individuals are capable of holding sort of many different feelings about a pregnancy and what they needed to do to take care of their family and themselves and the potential life that was there. Like all that's a lot of stuff to hold. So I'm gonna blah, blah, blah. Reproductive freedom. We talked a little bit about saving a life of the person who's carrying the pregnancy. The reason why, so one of the this past weekend, many congregations across the nation participated in Repro Shabbat. The Parsha Mishpatim is this week. That's sort of the story in Exodus that really is the basis for Jewish, for Judaism, support around abortion. Oops, I did not mean to jump to that. The other piece in all of this, the notion of pursuing justice, the idea of dignity, again, those are Jewish values. They're not exclusively Jewish values, but they are certainly part of Jewish values. I want to actually talk about some of this. Actually, before I don't actually want to talk about the evolution. I really want to actually dig into the story, because I think the story will actually help us tease out some of the nuances and values. This is a particular story of someone who got an abortion in Cleveland. And I would love for Sherry, could you read it to us?
Sure. I had my abortion on April 15, 2016. It was an unplanned pregnancy with someone I didn't see myself with for a long-term relationship. At the time, I had began working on a pro-choice coalition project and felt lucky to use my degree in a work environment that was both exciting and supportive. I had accomplished a few significant milestones, obtaining my master's, traveling out of the country, moving into my home place. However, getting an abortion felt like my first adult decision and my first parenting decision. The unplanned pregnancy gave me the opportunity to really think about the path I wanted my life to take and the life I want to give my future children. I am grateful for my abortion because it was my moment of clarity.
So, thank you for reading that. I would love to take a moment to sort of just talk about that story a little bit. Was there anything in the story that surprised you?
Yes, because I've been hearing, especially across my dinner table, about the difficult choices that people undergo and how it's like putting tears on the knife before killing an animal. And here is somebody who's saying, maybe, I don't know if this person's experience is unusual or not, that this was actually an empowering decision for this person, that it really gave her a sense that she could figure out what was important for her life and act on it.
Carrie, Marcia, thoughts?
Not really.
Well, yeah, I think that part is missing. I mean, I can see it, and I think she made the right decision for herself. At the same time, it would seem to me to be that there must have been a lot more. I mean, it just sounds so Pollyannic in a way, you know. This was the best thing for me, blah, blah. It couldn't have been that easy. It couldn't have been so, you know, so simple. And I think of, you know, recently we had the speaker whose mother was clearly unready to be a mother, and she had him, and he had a very, very difficult childhood, and yet he managed to grow into a fabulous young man and have his own family and was resilient. And so I don't think it's so easy. That's all. I think that the law shouldn't allow people to make those decisions, but this makes it sound like it's a piece of cake. It's not. She couldn't have been, you know, it couldn't have been that simple.
Or it could be simple for her, but maybe for most people it would not be simple. And maybe that speaks to a certain lack of appreciation of what's at stake on behalf of this young woman. That's what you're saying?
Yeah.
What do you what do you think about the sentence, "It was her first parenting decision"? How does that sit with you?
It doesn't, it does and it doesn't. And that's the whole thing of all of it, really, for me. I mean, it's easy to say, but it's not. It is and it's not.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
The problem is that people become pregnant who are very young. And very young can include 21, 22, 23. And, you know, I'm as a therapist running into people, not people who are pregnant. That's not really something I'm running into a lot, but running into people that age who really have a lot to learn about life. That I run into all the time. And the idea that they would feel compelled to bring a child to term and to give birth to a child under those circumstances when they're really not ready, that's disturbing. And I do think that having an abortion allows them to kind of close the book on that process. If you have to carry the child for 9 months and then give birth to the child and then hand that child over through some legal process to the state to be given to someone else, that's a big deal for someone to have to go through. And you know, I just think that that's a lot to saddle a person with.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not saying that's what you should have done. I'm just saying that it doesn't speak to the pain, any of the pain and ambivalence that a person might feel.
Oh, I wish we had more time.
As a therapist, I have had to work a lot with people who had abortions and who feel very guilty about their abortion and never really forgave themselves for having an abortion and are constantly fantasizing about that child and what he or she would have been like. So it's very hard.
I think that's more the reality of what it would be. That's what I was trying to say. Yeah.
Yes.
Although I do think that a lot of that my sense at least, is because of the sort of shame and stigma that's attached to these reproductive choices. I think that I think from a values basis, right, making, we are always faced with making decisions. And as you put it, Sherry, trying very often to choose the lesser of two evils. And just because both options weren't great doesn't mean that we should feel shame about choosing the one that was less terrible. And I think that, again, I think this is so tied up, as Glenn and sort of at least implied right before, it's about sex, right? It's about people having autonomy over their bodies, right? It's and I think one thing that I actually really am struck, right, that this woman did feel like this was her first adult decision, right? In a way, right, making a decision about whether to continue the potential life inside you. That's a grown-up decision you have to make, whether she was ready to make it or not. And I think that she doesn't seem, at least in this snippet, to have a lot of regret or fantasies about what that child might have been, because she's looking forward, right? She's looking to the life that I mean, she's young, so she has this idea that you can plan your life and have things work out the way you want to. That's great that she thinks that. She'll come to be in her 50s, God willing, at some point, and realize that, no, it doesn't work that way. But to whatever degree she wants to, believe that fiction, that's great. But she's really focused on the children that she wants to have. And I think that, she could have been in the position of someone who has this first child, quote unquote, too early, whatever that means, right? Would she even end up having additional children, right? Or would this be it, because she's not going to be in a relationship with the person who is the father, so on and so forth. I mean, it's it's all very well and good to say, oh, give up the baby for adoption. It's not simple for children to be adopted. I'm not, again, is it a better, is it a worse? I mean, these are individual decisions that people need to make based on their
No,
body.
I wasn't saying that she should be shamed or that she should.
Oh, of course not. Oh no, I'm
I
not.
don't think we heard that.
Oh, I don't mean that at all. What I'm saying is that I just think that what Marcia is reporting, right? I have a feeling that has to do with our culture, not you, Sherry, but just the way Americans talk about these issues.
Yeah, I just think that it would be unlikely that someone would feel so positive about it. That's all I'm just saying.
Yeah. I haven't really run into guilt and shame over having an abortion in my own practice. And I've been a therapist for 40 years. So you got to wonder about that. Maybe it says something about me. But I do run into people who have shame over things that happened when they were younger. And so people can feel shame over all kinds of things that happened before in their lives. It's not restricted to having an abortion. And usually when there is this shame, it's because the person, for some reason, is not having compassion for their younger self who made that decision, because that person was really in a jam. That person really was having a hard time, and they had to make a tough decision. And for some reason, at this years remove, this person is not able to have compassion for the situation that they were in when they were younger. And for me, that's a therapeutic issue. I see that as a therapy. Now, that's probably, I can be pilloried for that because, I'm a therapist. I think that everything is all about therapy. But I think that shame happens in a lot of circumstances. It's not unique to abortion.
would so I'm aware.
Agree with that. Sure. Yes, definitely. And I'm sure that these people who are very shame and very guilt ridden probably need to forgive themselves or to look at why they had to do what they did when they decided. I agree with that also.
Right. So I am aware of the time. This is a really rich conversation that I don't actually want to cut short, but I also don't want to. There's also a second story I have here that we're not going to read, but it's a story. This story is actually about a person. Actually, it's about Gabrielle Union, the actress.
Oh, right. And
her attempt, like she was actually working to get pregnant. And it's a nuanced story about the decision that this isn't actually an abortion story. It is a reproductive health, reproductive journey, and basically what goes through her mind and how she has to, at some point she realizes she's really not been putting herself forward around any of the decisions that she's been making. She's sort of kept herself in the background. But it's a really rich story for the dynamics between partners, for a person's sort of self-realization, and it's an interesting contrast to a story about somebody who wants to terminate a pregnancy. This is a story about somebody who wants to be pregnant, which brings me to the larger conversation about Jim, you were talking earlier about sort of differences between abortion access and abortion justice and reproductive justice. So reproductive justice really comes from Black women in 1994 who posed a different kind of framework for looking at a series of rights, because they experienced the way they moved through the world. It was not as simple as just rights. Like, rights mean very little if you don't actually have the ability to access it. And rights, there's many sort of different intersections of oppressions that keep people from, living the full lives that they want to. And so in a reproductive justice lens, it's really both about being able to create and parent the families you want or not, and then to be able to have them flourish. And so the lens begins to also incorporate, so I raise my family, but we're in a neighborhood where there's so much violence that I can't really take care of my kids in the way that I'd want to. Or I live in an environmentally, the school that my kids go to is actually on a toxic, is on a toxic dump. So all of these different, it's an analysis that brings in not just abortion or abortion rights or health. It really looks at all of the factors that contribute to flourishing families or the opposite. Now I know we're out of, so the last couple of things that I really want to continue the discussion. I'm actually willing to, but I also want to be respectful of folks' time. So the 73 Forward program at NCJW really is about bringing together the Jewish community around abortion access. Basically removing the roadblocks, whether they're financial, educational, legislative, removing the barriers that get in the way of individuals being able to access abortion. It's about speaking up loudly and proudly and Jewishly around abortion access. I lead this, co-lead this with my co-partner, Shira Zemel. And if there was one thing that I would have folks do at the moment, it would be some advocacy around the Women's Health Protection Act. This is important legislation that would remedy many of the, I was talking earlier about all this legislation that was passed to sort of chip away at Roe and make it harder for, this would sort of remedy a lot of that. It's basically statutory language that would gives providers the right to provide abortions and patients the right to receive them. That would be the piece that I would really, advocate for. I could drop something. I can send something to Jim afterwards to sort of to get in touch with you about that. But really, if we want to continue the conversation, you're welcome to. But I also don't want to,
Should probably wrap it up. I would love just the on one foot presentation of the evolution of the language. That would be very helpful for me to sort of see where things are now.
Yes. So the way I was going to do this. So the short of it is, we used to talk about reproductive freedom. We talk less about that and more about the justice piece, abortion justice, in part because, well, actually, I'm going to use the pro-choice piece. We use pro-choice a whole lot less. We talk about pro-abortion or pro-abortion access because choice assumes that every individual, to some extent, assumes that every individual actually has the ability to make a choice, but you really don't have much of a choice if the nearest clinic is, 600 miles away and you have no way to travel there. So that's part of the reason why it's evolved from pro-choice to pro-abortion access. It's really the acknowledgement of the limitations of choice as a framework. Now, the notion, this one's I wish we'd had more time, would have asked you. So why do you think things would have changed from safe, rare, and legal to support for abortion access? And I guess I will ask it. Like,
you did ask.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, that one seems to me also, although those three things are great, right? Again, that you can't have a safe abortion if you don't have a clinic anywhere nearby, right? And so it's not enough for it to be legal, right? It needs to be available.
And it's also this idea that language right there can be stigmatizing,
right?
The sense, like, how many abortions are the right number of abortions in the country?
Right.
The right number of abortions in the country, I would say, is the number of abortions that people need to have. Like, it's not 6, it's not 30, it's
right.
X is the number that people need.
I mean, I get the whole rare business. I'm in the Soviet Union, abortion was birth control, right? And I think that there were way too many abortions, and not because it's something that people should be ashamed of or whatever, but it was just because they didn't have other forms of birth control, right? And so I'm very sympathetic to that kind of language, but I get that it's not sufficient now.
So I guess the bow on this is, the most powerful ways about talking about this, about these issues in general, is going back to the values that we hold as a community, using Jewish values, dignity, autonomy, compassion, justice. Using those gives us the strongest place to both tamp down the heat in an argument and gives us strength to sort of, because these are the things that we believe. And so it doesn't have to be this, kind of conversation. It can be a conversation about the things that matter. And those would be my parting words. And again, it's really, part of 73 Forward is really about surfacing these conversations, getting folks talking, educating ourselves both about, what the broader political landscape, but even just what our families and synagogues think, and, what the stories are, what people's stories are. So I really thank you for letting me be a part of this tonight. This was
And thank you so much, Glenn.
really fun.
This is really wonderful, and thank you for your work.
Yeah, really.
It's so important. And please do, Glenn, send along that, information about how, for people, how they might get involved.
Please.
I'll send you the link for this, and feel free to use it if it's useful. And I really appreciate you making the time for this. It's really deepened my appreciation for, how important this, and it's also making me feel slightly less helpless, which is always good.
I hear you. Thank you, everybody.
I like the style of the presentation too.
Yeah.
Very
It's
helpful.
nice to have the conversation, really thinking about, really talking it through.
Yeah.
Really.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Sherry. Thanks to Marsha, and a special thank you to Glenn.
Yeah,
Thank you
Bye-bye,
for
everybody.
arranging it.
really nice to spend this time with you.
Yeah, it's been great. All right, everybody. Bye-bye.